I used to tell my friends that Julian didn't just walk into my life, he fought his way into it. He spent 2 years proving to my traditional parents that he was worthy of me. He stood outside our house in the rain, he wrote letters, he worked 3 jobs to save for a ring, and he promised my father that his only mission in life was my happiness. I walked down the aisle, feeling like the most blessed woman on earth. I didn't know that the man waiting for me at the altar was an actor, and our marriage was his greatest performance. I didn't find out because of a scandalous photo or a dramatic confession. I found out because of a grocery receipt and a scent of perfume that didn't belong to me. Our love story was the kind people envied. When I met Julian in college, my family was strictly against our union. We came from different worlds. My family was conservative and valued status, while Julian was a self-made guy with nothing but a beat-up car and a brilliant mind. My father told him he would never be enough for me. Most men would have walked away, but Julian stayed. He didn't just stay, he campaigned for me. He would bring my mother her favorite flowers even when she refused to open the door. He took up extra shifts at a warehouse and a restaurant, just to show my father he was hardworking. I remember him sitting on our porch, his hands calloused and tired, saying, "Nora, I don't care if it takes 10 years. I'm not going anywhere." That kind of dedication does something to a woman. It builds a sense of security that is almost impossible to break. When my father finally gave in and gave us his blessing, I felt like we had won a war. Our wedding wasn't just a ceremony, it was a victory lap. As we danced our first dance to At Last, I whispered in his ear, "You did it, Julian. You fought for us." He pulled me closer and replied, "I'd do it all over again, Nora. You're my entire world." The first year of our marriage was a dream. We moved into a small, sun-drenched apartment that we decorated together. Julian was the perfect husband. He would leave little notes on the bathroom mirror. He would cook dinner when I was tired from my job as a teacher. He was still the man who had fought for me. My parents eventually grew to love him. My father would pat him on the back and say, "I was wrong about you, son. You're a good man." Julian would just smile, that humble, shy smile that made me melt. I felt like I had built my life on a foundation of solid rock. I was so convinced of his love that I stopped looking for signs of trouble. Why would I? A man doesn't struggle that much for a woman he doesn't intend to cherish, right? That was my first mistake. The change didn't happen overnight. It was like a slow leak in a tire. You don't notice it until you're riding on the rim. It started when Julian got a promotion at the architectural firm where he worked. He started coming home an hour late. Then, too, he said the pressure of the new role was getting to him. "I'm doing this for us, Nora," he'd say, his voice sounding slightly flat. "I want to give you the life you deserve. I don't want your father to ever think I've stopped struggling for you." I felt guilty for wanting him home. I started doing more around the house, trying to be the perfect, supportive wife to the man who had sacrificed so much for me. But the intimacy was drying up. When he did come home, he was exhausted. He'd sit on the couch, staring at his phone, his thumb scrolling endlessly. When I'd try to talk to him about my day, he'd give me one-word answers. "Are you okay, Julian?" I'd ask, sitting beside him. "Just tired, Nora." Just tired. But he wasn't too tired to smile at his phone. I'd see the reflection of the screen in his glasses. Social media, news, emails. Nothing suspicious, but the warmth was gone. The man who used to fight for a glimpse of me was now looking right through me. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Julian had left his gym bag in the hallway, which was unlike him. As I picked it up to put it in the laundry, a small, crumpled piece of paper fell out of the side pocket. It was a receipt from a high-end grocery store on the other side of the city, a place Julian had no reason to visit. I looked at the items: 2 steaks, a bottle of expensive Chardonnay, a bouquet of lilies. My heart did a strange, painful flip. I checked the timestamp. It was from last Friday, the night Julian told me he was working late on a critical project and had grabbed a quick sandwich at his desk. He had come home that night smelling faintly of wood smoke and expensive wine, but he told me he'd just been around a colleague who was a heavy smoker. I sat on the floor of the hallway, the receipt trembling in my fingers. Lilies. Lilies were my favorite. But he hadn't brought them home. He hadn't brought the steak home. He hadn't brought the wine home. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was for a client? Maybe he was helping a friend? But the cold, hard knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. I realized that for the last few months, Julian had stopped struggling for our marriage, and he had started struggling to hide something else. That night, for the first time in our 3 years of marriage, I waited until Julian was in a deep sleep, and I reached for his phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I felt like a criminal. I felt ashamed. But the intuition of a woman is a powerful, terrifying thing. The phone was locked with a new passcode. Not our anniversary, not my birthday. I tried his mother's birthday. Nothing. I tried the date of his first big promotion. Click. The screen opened. There were no dating apps, no hidden folders, but there was a contact named Miller, project lead. I opened the message thread. It wasn't about architecture. The steak was perfect, Julian. I still smell like you. When are you coming back? Sent Friday at 11:30 p.m. Julian's reply. As soon as I can make an excuse. Being at home feels like a prison lately. I'm just playing the part until I can figure out the exit. The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Playing the part. Prison. The man who had fought my father. The man who had worked 3 jobs. The man who had promised to cherish me until his last breath. Viewed our home as a prison. I didn't wake him up. I couldn't. I stood in the dark kitchen, clutching the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. I looked at the wedding photos on the wall, the 2 of us laughing under the cherry blossom trees. I looked at the handmade vase he'd bought me on our first anniversary. It was all a facade. He hadn't fought for me. He had fought for the challenge. He was a man who loved the chase, the struggle, the impossible win. Once he had won me, once the struggle was over and life became mundane and real, he got bored. I wasn't his partner. I was his trophy. And now that the trophy was sitting on the shelf, he was looking for a new game to play. I realized that Claire, the Miller in his phone, wasn't just a mistress. She was his new project. He was likely telling her how trapped he was, how misunderstood his wife made him feel, playing the same soulful, struggling man that had captured my heart. I didn't wake him up. I couldn't bear the thought of him looking at me with those lying eyes. I stood in the kitchen until the sun began to peek through the blinds. I realized that if I confronted him now, he would use that silver tongue of his to twist the truth. He would cry, he would remind me of how hard he fought for me, and he would make me feel like the crazy one for doubting him. He was a professional actor, and if I wanted to win, I had to stop being the audience. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I spent the rest of the night planning. If he wanted to play a part, I would give him the performance of a lifetime. I would be the blissfully ignorant wife for just a little longer. I would let him think his prison was secure, while I quietly dismantled the bars. I thought about my parents. I thought about how much they loved him now. The thought of telling my father that the man he finally trusted was a fraud made my stomach churn. But I knew I couldn't live a lie. Julian had spent years building a paper fortress around us, and I was going to be the one to light the match. The next morning, Julian woke up and kissed my cheek like he always did. Morning, beautiful. You slept late. I was just having a lovely dream, Julian, I said, my voice as smooth as glass. A dream about our future. He smiled, that same humble, shy smile that used to make me melt. Now it just made my skin crawl. I'm heading in early today. Big meeting. Of course, I said, helping him with his tie. I tightened the knot just a little more than usual. Don't work too hard. Remember, you've already won the prize. He chuckled, grabbed his bag, and walked out the door. I watched his car pull out of the driveway. As soon as he was gone, I pulled out my laptop and searched for a very specific type of lawyer, one who specialized in complex marital fraud. I sat there in the quiet house, the silence ringing in my ears. I wasn't the girl Julian had met in college anymore. I wasn't the girl who needed to be fought for. I was a woman who was about to fight for herself. The struggle was over. The war had just begun. For the next 3 days, I lived with a ghost. Julian walked through the rooms of our apartment, eating the meals I cooked, laughing at my jokes, and kissing my forehead before he left for work. But I no longer saw the man I had married. I saw a hollow shell, a masterpiece of skin and bone that was hiding a rot so deep it made the air in the room feel heavy. I had to practice my expressions in the bathroom mirror before he came home. I had to make sure my eyes didn't show the fire that was consuming me from the inside. I was no longer his wife. I was a private investigator in a floral apron, waiting for the moment the predator stepped into his own trap. The grocery receipt had been the crack in the dam, but the flood came on Thursday morning. Julian had left his briefcase in the study, something he never did. He was always so meticulous, so careful. But arrogance makes men sloppy. They start to believe their own lies so much that they think they are invincible. I walked into the study, the sunlight hitting the leather of the briefcase, and I felt a cold shiver of anticipation. I didn't have to break a lock. The latch clicked open with a soft, mocking sound. Inside weren't just architectural blueprints or project notes. Tucked into a hidden pocket at the bottom were bank statements from an offshore account I had never seen. My eyes scanned the numbers, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Over the last 18 months, Julian had been systematically siphoning money from our joint savings, the Forever Home Fund we had built together. But it wasn't just the joint money. He had managed to gain access to my personal inheritance, a sum my grandmother had left me for my future children. He had forged my signature on transfer documents, moving small, invisible amounts every month, totaling nearly $120,000. My hands shook as I held the paper. This was the money he had promised to protect. This was the security he had sworn to provide. He wasn't just spending it on steaks and wine for Claire. He was building a life for her using the bricks he had stolen from mine. Deep within the briefcase, I found something even worse. A lease agreement for a luxury apartment downtown. The commencement date was 2 months ago. The tenants listed were Julian and Claire Miller. I leaned against the desk, the room spinning. He wasn't just having an affair, he was living a double life. While I was at home, grading papers and planning our future, he was playing house in a high-rise with another woman, likely telling her the same lies about struggling and sacrifice that he had used to win me. I realized then that Julian didn't love Claire any more than he loved me. He loved the heist. He loved the adrenaline of being a thief in broad daylight. The hardest part wasn't the money. It was thinking about my father. That evening, my parents came over for a, quote, family dinner that Julian had insisted on. Watching Julian pour wine for my father, laughing about old stories, and asking for advice on building a legacy made me want to scream. My father looked at Julian with such genuine pride. "You're the son I never had, Julian," my father said, patting his hand. "Nora is a lucky woman to have a man who fought so hard for her." Julian smiled. That humble, modest smile. "I'm the lucky one, sir." Nora is my anchor. I had to excuse myself to the kitchen. I stood over the sink, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. I realized that if I exposed him now, in the middle of dinner, I would break my father's heart as much as my own. My father had spent his whole life protecting our family's honor, and Julian had turned that honor into a joke. I decided right then, I wouldn't just leave him. I would ensure that when the truth came out, Julian was the only one left standing in the ruins. The next morning, as soon as Julian left for his meeting, I visited the lawyer I had contacted, a woman named Ms. Sterling. She was sharp, clinical, and didn't offer me tissues for the tears I refused to cry. "He's been clever," Ms. Sterling said, looking over the documents I had photographed from his briefcase. "He's using your inheritance to pay the lease on the other apartment, making it look like business expenses for a shell company he set up. But he made one fatal mistake." "What's that?" I asked. "He used your digital signature on a federal tax document to hide the transfer." "That's not just divorce court drama, Nora. That's fraud. If we play this right, he won't just lose you, he'll lose his career and his freedom." We spent 4 hours in that office. We didn't just file for divorce. We set up a reverse audit. I wasn't going to tell him I knew. Instead, I was going to wait for the biggest night of his career, the annual architecture gala, where he was being nominated for Designer of the Year. He had invited my parents, his colleagues, and, as I discovered from his texts, he had even arranged for Claire to be there under the guise of a client. The week leading up to the gala was the most difficult performance of my life. I became the most supportive, loving wife Julian had ever seen. I bought him a new tuxedo. I cooked his favorite meals. I listened to him talk about his vision for the future. "You're being so wonderful lately, Nora," he said one night, holding me on the sofa. "I feel like we're back in that first year. The struggle was worth it." "It was, wasn't it?" I replied, my voice a whisper. The struggle reveals exactly who people are. He didn't notice the double meaning. He was too wrapped up in his own brilliance. He thought he had successfully managed 2 women, a secret apartment, and a massive financial fraud without a single person noticing. He thought I was the same naive girl who believed in rain-soaked letters and humble smiles. 2 days before the gala, I decided I needed to see Claire. I didn't want to confront her. I wanted to understand the target. I waited outside the downtown apartment building Julian had leased. After an hour, she walked out. She was young, perhaps 5 years younger than me, with a hurried, anxious energy. She looked like a woman who was constantly waiting for a phone call. I watched her sit at a nearby cafe, and 10 minutes later, Julian's car pulled up. I watched from my car, hidden behind a tinted window, as he got out and kissed her. It wasn't the respectful, gentle kiss he gave me. It was a kiss of ownership. I saw him hand her a small box, jewelry. I knew, without even looking at my bank app, that the money for that jewelry had come from my grandmother's trust. I didn't feel jealous. I felt a strange, cold pity. She thought she had stolen a prince. She had no idea she had inherited a parasite who would do the exact same thing to her the moment a bigger struggle came along. The night before the gala, I sat in our bedroom while Julian slept. I looked at the man who had fought so hard to be in my life. I realized that Julian never loved me. He loved the version of himself he saw in my eyes, a hero, a conqueror, a man of integrity. But that man never existed. He was a character he had created to get access to the life he thought he deserved. I had already signed the papers. My lawyer had already contacted the board of the architecture firm. The gift I had prepared for the gala wasn't a tribute. It was a dossier. Julian stirred in his sleep and reached for my hand. "Go back to sleep, Nora," he mumbled. "Tomorrow is a big day. The biggest, Julian," I said, pulling my hand away and placing it on my own heart. The biggest day of our lives. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and silk gowns. Julian looked magnificent. He stood at the center of the room, the golden boy of the industry. My parents were there, looking at him with adoration. I saw Claire in the distance, wearing a dress that looked suspiciously like the one Julian had told me was too expensive for us to buy for my birthday last month. She was watching him from afar, her eyes full of the same devotion I once had. The master of ceremonies approached the stage. And now, for the Architect of the Year award, this year's nominees have shown us that a building is only as strong as its foundation. I felt the legal folder in my silk clutch. It felt like a weapon. I looked at Julian, who was straightening his cuffs, ready to take the stage and claim another trophy. "Julian," I whispered, leaning in close so only he could hear. "Yes, darling?" He beamed, not even looking at me, his eyes fixed on the stage. "I hope you're ready for the unveiling," I said. He finally looked at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "What unveiling?" "It's an awards ceremony, Nora." "Oh, it's much more than that," I said, as the screen behind the podium began to flicker with the tribute video I had submitted to the committee's media team under the guise of a surprise. The music on the video started. It wasn't the uplifting orchestral music of a career highlight reel. It was a recording of a phone call, one I had captured using the baby monitor I'd placed in his secret study. The entire ballroom went silent. Julian's name appeared on the screen, but underneath it, the words "A Study in Fraud" began to scroll. Julian's face went from gold to gray. He turned to me, his mouth opening, but no sound came out. My father's glass shattered on the floor. Claire froze in the corner. I didn't look at the screen. I looked at Julian. "You always told me you'd do anything for me, Julian," I said, my voice barely a whisper in the sudden deafening silence of the room. "Well, tonight, you're finally going to tell the truth. Let's see how you handle this struggle." The first slide appeared on the screen, a side-by-side of my grandmother's forged signature and the lease agreement for the apartment. The room began to murmur. The cameras turned toward us. The prince had lost his crown, and the fortress was about to burn. The ballroom of the architecture gala, once a place of prestige, had turned into a courtroom of public opinion. As the images of the forged documents and the secret lease agreement flashed on the giant screen, the silence was replaced by a roar of whispers. Julian stood frozen, his hand still gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. He looked at the screen, then at me, then at my father, whose face was a mask of pure heartbreaking betrayal. "Nora, shut it off," Julian finally hissed, his voice cracking. He tried to lung toward the tech booth, but 2 security guards, who had already been briefed by my lawyer, stepped in his way. I didn't flinch. I stood there, watching the man who had struggled so hard for me dissolve into a puddle of desperation. "It's too late, Julian," I said, my voice echoing through the silent room. The foundation was rotten. I'm just the one who let the world see the cracks. Claire, the woman he had promised a new life to, was now backing away, trying to disappear into the crowd. She realized in that moment that she wasn't the new love. She was just another piece of stolen property in Julian's long list of frauds. As the presentation ended, my lawyer, Ms. Sterling, walked onto the stage. She didn't say a word to the crowd. She simply handed Julian a thick envelope. "These are the papers for the immediate freeze of all accounts, Julian. And those men standing by the door? They aren't here for the awards. They're from the Fraud Investigation Unit." The look on Julian's face wasn't one of remorse. It was the look of a gambler who had finally lost his last hand. He turned to my father, his eyes welling with fake tears, his last attempt at a performance. "Sir, please, it's not what it looks like. I did it for Nora. I wanted to give her everything." My father, the man who had once defended Julian against the world, stood up slowly. He didn't yell. He didn't hit him. He simply looked at Julian with a cold, piercing clarity. "You didn't do this for Nora," my father said, his voice trembling with quiet rage. "You used my daughter's love as a bank account. You aren't the man I thought you were. You aren't even a man." The weeks following the gala were a whirlwind of legal filings and quiet reflection. Julian was stripped of his architectural license and faced multiple counts of financial fraud. Since he had used my inheritance to pay for his double life, the court ruled in my favor, returning every cent he had siphoned. The luxury apartment he shared with Claire was liquidated, and Julian ended up exactly where he started, with nothing but a silver tongue that no one believed anymore. I didn't stay in the apartment we had shared. I sold it and moved back to the quiet suburbs, near my parents. I realized that for 3 years, I had been living in a paper fortress, a place that looked strong, but was actually fragile and fake. To every woman watching this, a man's struggle to get you is not always a sign of his love. Sometimes, it's just a sign of his ambition. Julian didn't love me. He loved the challenge of winning me and the life I represented. When a man tells you he's doing everything for you, while keeping you in the dark about the details, pay attention. Trust is earned every day, not just during the pursuit. True love doesn't require a performance, and it certainly doesn't require you to be a victim of someone else's greed. I lost a husband, but I found my worth, and that is a prize no one can ever steal again. Do you think Julian ever really loved Nora, or was she just a trophy for him to win? Have you ever realized that someone's grand gestures were actually a cover for their lies? Let me know in the comments below.